for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Andrew Zimmel, host as always. Thank you for clicking on us. Thank you for checking us out. When I started this podcast, so many days ago, I said to you guys, we're going to put out a ton of content. It's all going to be great, and you're going to enjoy every second of it because we're going to break down a bunch of different topics from pop culture to TV to movies to sports, and I always was going to go and try to get you the best possible people I could. I did it again for you. Alexander Haynes, who you may or may not remember he and I worked together at a little radio station called KTSW in San Marcos. And I knew then that he was going to be something special. What I did not realize was he was going to be one of the best international reporters, arguably, to ever come out of Texas State. And I brought him on the podcast to talk about his time in Hong Kong covering the protests, the coronavirus that has everybody really freaked out, and then Cambridge Analytica, who is constantly ruining elections and pretty much destroying the entire world. So I brought him on to talk to us about all these different topics. You didn't know you were going to get a news podcast and all this. I strongly, highly, super recommend you listen to this from the beginning to the end because you're going to leave this podcast with a lot more information than you're coming in with. I'm going to shut up. Here's Alexander. All right, on the phone line right now, a close friend of mine who got a really good opportunity, and I had to talk to him about it, Alexander Haynes. Alexander, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, perfect. So, first off, tell the people what you're doing right now and all the cool places you've gotten to travel.
Yeah, definitely. So I have been in Hong Kong for the better part of since about August, October, really, and then into December. I've been in Hong Kong covering the protests there that have quickly turned into kind of a social revolution, a lot more than just the 5 demands that they're hoping for earlier in the summer and the anti-extradition bill that really kickstarted this thing in May. And then I'm also working on some reports about the Cambridge Analytica leaks that have been going out since January 1st. A lot of information on what Cambridge Analytica and SCL was involved with early in their kind of startup program.
All right, I want to get into all of that because it's just a bunch of really interesting stuff. But first, I want to talk about how you ended up going to Hong Kong. Because 1 minute I'm following you on Twitter, the next minute you're in Hong Kong. Kind of give me some background on that, Alexander.
Yeah, so it's a pretty stunning shift for me too, to be honest. Basically, it just kind of happened. Back in May and June, really, actually it was June 12th, I was just on Twitter and I noticed I started seeing footage from the protest and some of the protesters getting beaten by cops, a lot of tear gas. And so I just kind of started sending some messages and I was able to make a contact there that had witnessed some of this stuff. And so I just started talking. I did a small report on it. I was able to acquire some funding and I decided I want to go cover this. This is going to be a very historic event. And that's kind of why I decided to go and cover this. And is because China is one of the biggest growing economies right now. I mean, they have 1 billion people in their country. The trade war was getting kickstarted right during that point in late August. We were thinking about signing the first trade deal. So this was going to be a really historic push by the people of Hong Kong because this is really the first time that anybody has collectively protested against the modern CCP and President Xi Jinping. So I just had that feeling that this is going to be something historic, and obviously it turned into something a lot more than I was imagining. I remember when I was over there in October, we were talking about elections getting canceled, the PLA coming out, and it becoming martial law. PLA has still not come out. It's still not martial law. And there have been small victories by the Hong Kong people. It turned out a lot. I mean, of course, there's been a lot of tragedy involved, and a lot of these kids are never going to be the same. But it turned out a lot different than I was expecting. Still historic, though.
This is incredible. And one of those deals where I think you're going to get to tell your grandkids about being on the ground for one of the. This is up there, I think, with the Arab Springs when we talk about fighting for democracy in the 21st century.
Oh, definitely, definitely. This is definitely up there with the Arab Spring. And it may as well as kickstart an Arab Spring 2.0 because we saw in October the Hong Kong was inspiring a lot of other places. We saw the Catalonia protest, and there's a lot of outpouring from the people in Hong Kong to the people in Catalonia. There's a little bit of outpouring from Hong Kong to the people of Iraq who are starting kind of it's a smaller Arab Spring 2.0, and it's received a lot more. Unfortunately, the police and the military has come out and used live bullets against protesters in Hong Kong, but it's inspired a lot of other places, and it's going to be a very dramatic shift, and we're going to have to see, especially with the coronavirus spreading right now. It's going to be interesting to see how China responds to Hong Kong because they have their legislative council elections coming up in September. And last November we saw the district council, which is pretty much like our city council, but because Hong Kong obviously is a smaller country than the United States, district council is a little bit like our city council, a little bit more elevated than that. But that's kind of what they are. And we saw a lot of the CCP, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. For those who are not familiar, a lot of them expected their candidates, the pro-Beijing candidates, to be able to win a landslide victory, and they didn't. In fact, it is the pro-Democrat Party that just swept through Hong Kong and is really that was a huge blow to Beijing, and they were not expecting that.
Now, we should have done this from the top. Can you explain a little bit about what the Hong Kong protest started with and what it is now? The difference, because I think it's two different things from the kickstart of this movement to what it has turned into right now.
Yeah, it is. And so there's about, and I, obviously, because I could be sitting here talking for hours about it, but there's about a century of conflict ever since they were under colonial British rule. And so there's a good century of protesting history, a lot of bent up anger through about 2 generations of people now. So this exact protest started out in May of this year when there is a proposed extradition law by the Hong Kong government, and that would allow, because they're a special administrative region, although they are their own quote-unquote country, they are a special administrative region of China. They're handed over from Britain to China officially in 1997. There's a lot more history over there, but that's what you need to know. And Carrie Lam is the chief executive, and I'm sure if you've been following the Hong Kong protests at all, you've seen her face a lot. So there's this proposed extradition law, and the concern was that anybody arrested in Hong Kong could be tried in mainland China. And so there's a lot of commotion about this was kind of taking judicial precedent from the Hong Kong judiciary form to China, is basically encroachment by China. And so that was what the protest started out as in May. And then we get to June 9th and 12th, and those are 2 key dates where the 5 demands come. And that's because a lot of people are arrested. There's a lot of police brutality on those days. And so people start coming back now protesting against police brutality. And so the 5 demands are to form an investigation into the police, to redefine the protesters because they've been charged as riots. And so they want amnesty for all rioters. And then they also want everybody to be released from prison because there's still a lot of kids and adults as well in prison right now. And then the 4th demand was, of course, for the universal suffrage because they do not have universal suffrage. They cannot vote for the chief executive, and then their legislative council, they do not have full democracy to vote for. Only the district council is a popular vote. And the 5th demand was actually met, and that's the repeal of the extradition law. The government officially repealed that. But it's now turned into pretty much an anti-China, anti-Chinese encroachment. The one interesting thing that I should note, though, is they do not want to separate a majority of people. It's only about 17% of people in the last poll want Hong Kong to be fully independent. A lot of people do not mind that they belong to China, that it's one country, two systems. They just want democracy in their second system. And a lot of the reasoning behind whether they don't want full independence is because they realize that China basically has control of their economy. A lot of the food supplies, a lot of the tourism industry, which now propels a lot of Hong Kong's economy, is controlled directly by China. So if they do go independent, if they do kind of make that fuller revolution, odds are they will not survive for long. They'll just be starved out.
So talk to me a little bit about the stories that you have been able to do from Hong Kong.
Yeah, so that's been there. I mean, there are a lot of different stories, and just every little experience. It's something that it's not being a combat journalist, but you are out there on the front lines getting shot at with tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, non-lethal rounds, beanbag rounds, and there's a lot that goes through your head. And you're out there for a couple of hours a day, and you're talking. And I think the most interesting thing is you're talking to kids. These are a lot of the protesters are from ages 10. There's someone as young as 10. The common ground is though 13 to about 23, kind of that middle school to college age in the United States. And that's been one of the most interesting things to cover, is just talking to these kids, because they don't see a future for themselves. They feel like they are very they're strung out to die, basically, because a lot of them cannot afford their own house, so they just see themselves living with their parents forever, which a lot of them are doing, or if their parents kick them out, they're just living together in hotels. And I remember talking to one girl, and she lives in a hotel now. I'm not sure where she is now, but at the time, she was living in a hotel with 10 other people, just because they had been kicked out of their house and they cannot afford to live anywhere else because the rent is just too high in Hong Kong. There's a lot of landowners are holding the rooms for hostage, basically. They don't mind that they have empty apartments, and that's one of the other reasons that they're protesting, is because of high rent prices. But there's just so many stories about what kids are willing to sacrifice. Talked to another kid who was willing to quit a very nice IT job to be able to go out and protest. A lot of these kids, if their identity is revealed, there's potential backlash from the community, from their parents, from China itself, and we're only now 27 years away from when China is set to take over Hong Kong fully, when that two systems dissolves and it's just going to become entirely one country. So those are a lot of the kind of the smaller stories that I've been able to cover.
That's so interesting, man, because I remember, and for those of you that didn't keep up with Alexander when he was at Texas State in the trenches with me at KTSW, this was not anything that either one of us thought, A, was going to happen in Hong Kong, but B, did you think that you were ever going to get to cover these type of stories?
I've always wanted to cover these type of stories, and I kind of had that feeling where, just on a personal level here, I kind of had that feeling where I needed to make this happen, because this is kind of like, this is where I wanted to take my career. But no, I always thought it was going to be in the Middle East. I never thought that I'd end up going to China to cover a protest. I thought I would be in the Middle East covering a protest. And so it's been personally, it's been a very stunning and very surreal past 4 months, just with everything that has happened to me over there. It's been very surreal.
So I had read a report that Hong Kong people that live there, the natives that lived in Hong Kong, they do not like mainland Chinese people that were coming in. And I think that's part of the reason why the rent was so high too, is just that Hong Kong is becoming overrun with people. There's too many people and not enough spaces. Did you kind of get that feeling there?
Yeah, I did. I did to a certain extent. And there are some open apartments, but there's a lot of mainland Chinese people coming in, and you can definitely tell because it is former Britain. Most people speak English and or Cantonese. There's two dialects of Chinese: Mandarin, which is simplified Chinese, and then Cantonese, which is traditional. And in Hong Kong, they either speak Cantonese or English, and most can understand Mandarin a little bit. But it's same language. It's just a little bit of differences. But there's a lot of people now who just speak Mandarin. They do not understand Cantonese or English very well, and so there's a huge influx of mainland Chinese. And I don't think that they don't because I don't want to say that they don't like them, but they don't appreciate the way that they're coming in and the way that the way that they're being sent in. Because this is definitely the Chinese government trying to influence Hong Kong in its way by making Hong Kong reliant on tourism, which is what they've effectively done since 2003. Really, there is an uptick in tourism by Chinese mainlanders, over 2 million people, uptick starting in 2003, 2004. And so because of that, it's really made the Hong Kong government dependent on tourism. And we've seen that since May, since really July is when it really started to drop off. Because people in mainland China, and that's the other thing, is the censorship. People in mainland China think Hong Kong is literally burning to the ground and that the entire city's on fire. And that's not the case. There are a lot of Molotovs being thrown in smaller fires, but entire building complexes are not burning down right now.
I want to move on to Cambridge Analytica, but before we get into that, I want to talk about the coronavirus. There's a relatively new occurrence. How big of a deal should we make out of this, Alexander? Because I think you would probably be the best person to talk to about this. I see on the internet people are really worried, and then at the same time, people don't seem to care as much. Where are you on this scale?
Yeah, so I've been following this really, really closely and exhausting myself with the research. And I'll tell you this, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There is a lot of, and just for anybody who's been looking at some of the statistics, particularly the R naught statistic that says for every one person infected, it's going to infect 3.8 people, 2.5, whatever. There's been a lot of different studies. A lot of those statistics don't really matter at this point because the virus has not stopped spreading. We're not even a month into this. So I would not be very worried about those statistics because they are helpful in making decisions, but they are not meaningful in telling how bad this is going to be. Now, should you be concerned? Yes, you should be concerned. This is a virus that is spreading. It has no cure. It has no vaccine. Basically depends on how good your immune system, if you'll survive or not. Now that's the additional good news. If a lot of the deaths from this have been either young children or if you're 60 or older with pre-existing conditions, there has been some outliers, of course, just people who just got hit really hard by the disease. But odds are, if you did get it, you would survive. Now, of course, that's at the current mutation that it's at. It could evolve more. It is an RNA virus, so it's going to evolve a lot more easier than a DNA virus will. So should you be worried? Yes, you should be cautious. I advise everybody to just wash your hands right now extra carefully. There have been a couple of suspected cases in Texas. I know we have one case here. A handful more people, about a dozen other people being monitored in Washington State. Wash your hands extra carefully. Just be sensitive about touching your face with dirty hands. Just take extra precautions right now. And that should stop you from getting sick right now, because most people I'm talking to right now are in the States. I would not be dramatically afraid. There's a lot of misinformation and doomsday people on the Twitter sphere that are profiting off of scaring you.
All right, let's talk about Cambridge Analytica, because this is a topic that I've not been able to stay on top of. So start from the beginning. What should we know about this?
Okay. So Cambridge Analytica is a firm, and there's a couple of documentaries that you can research. There's been wide coverage of Cambridge Analytica since really 2016, 2018. They closed down, them and SCL Group closed down in 2018 after a huge scandal where these two groups basically harvested 50 million accounts of personal data from Facebook. So that means your information was taken and used by Cambridge Analytica and SCL Group to be put into these big databases. And what they used that information for was people who, for a campaign. They're a campaign management firm. They had a lot of different people. And there's been a new set of leaks. And in this set of leaks, we found out there has been 42 campaigns in the states they've managed, which in 14 different states, as well as Ted Cruz's presidential bid in 2016 and ultimately Donald Trump's victory in 2016 as well. and they do favor right-wing organizations stateside as well. And basically, what they're doing is they were using personal data to basically create psychological warfare or psychological advertising. And they'll look at like what things trigger you, what things you're really concerned about. And all this is taken from Facebook and some Twitter, some just what you post out there on the internet. They're taking your personal data and then using that and advertising against you to make you more afraid so that you favor a typical candidate and this candidate. So, for example, I just published this article today about Kenya and what they're doing in Kenya. And there's a huge ethnic divide in Kenya. In 2008, 2007, there was 2 months of rioting after the police, after a presidential election, police shot innocent protesters. Mobs were running rampant in Kenya, and a lot of this was ethnically found. And over 10,000 people were injured, another 1,000 ended up dead. But the problem with this is they're using people in Kenya, they're using their personal data to send advertisements, to send campaigns, to target them with this basically fear-mongering data that, or this fear-mongering advertising to scare you into hating another group. And that's really the core of what is wrong with Cambridge Analytica.
Now, why would they do that? What profit do they make off of pretty much causing anarchy?
A lot of profit. The campaigning is huge. We're talking millions of dollars. They probably spent. I have the leaked budget here from their Kenya project, and it was in the way of $2.3 million, and that was just for the 2017 campaign. They also ran the 2013 campaign for President Kenyatta, and just as a side note, we'll get more into Kenya in a second, but President Kenyatta was somebody who is on trial at The Hague for crimes against humanity for alleged crimes in 2007 during the rioting. There is a lot of control that they can assert. If their candidate wins, then they get people in the White House. Steve Bannon, where he originated from, was Breitbart, of course, but he was also one of the key directors at Cambridge Analytica. Two of the men behind this have huge political power, Robert Mercer and Peter Thiel, who, if you're really super nuanced in politics, you've probably heard these two names, but they are big backers who want their people in the White House, who want their people in positions of power. So there's a lot. You can get a little bit conspiratorial about this, but there is a lot of, unfortunately, there is a lot of truth to the conspiracy theories behind Cambridge Analytica and kind of this quasi-control that they were trying to assert. And of course, they closed down in 2018. But my key question is, they exited with a lot of personal data and a lot of information and a lot of projects that we have no idea where they went, and they have a lot of sub-corporations that we've discovered through this leak.
So it's almost like you can see that the head of the fish is rotten, and now we're looking for the rest of the body, essentially, right? Like where the rest of this data went.
Yeah. And that's the key behind these leaks. We're discovering in these leak stuff that they were a lot of Boltons Pack they were very involved with, and that was kind of anti-Iranian. Of course, Iran is a threat, but there is a lot of anti-Iranian to make people scared about Iran, to kind of favor pro-war, which is, of course, that's a huge profit. They were operating in South Asia, was a huge market for them, especially in Malaysia, where they had a contract with Petronas, the state-run petroleum company. And what their problem was, Petronas had they've had actually multiple explosions and multiple leaks in their gas line, which goes into some indigenous villages. So they basically went in and created propaganda for Petronas to make Petronas favorable in the eyes of these rural and these indigenous villages that were getting destroyed by gas leaks.
This is incredible, Alexander, because for the average American or the average just news consumer, I think both of these stories, the Hong Kong and Cambridge Analytica, have kind of slipped through the cracks a little bit because Hong Kong was very important. I think people really cared about it for about 3 months here stateside, and the fight for democracy didn't stop. It's just this impeachment trial has kind of started, and I think that everybody has turned towards that. Cambridge Analytica, I knew of the company, but I had not been keeping up with everything that was happening. So this is very informative, I think, to everybody, the listeners included.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think this is a lot of, unfortunately, kind of what happens is things like this slip through the crack. And this is really, really important to what's going on, how our news is covered. Don't think for a second that companies like Cambridge Analytica don't influence what is put on the news, don't influence what kind of advertising is sent to your TV, to your Facebook, to your Twitter, when you're browsing and seeing ads. And it's a lot of subliminal messaging. And then Hong Kong, of course, like we talked about, it's a historic pushback against communist China, and one that we have not seen ever, really. And it could, with the way that China's economy is going, it very well could change the course of history, and definitely the course of history that Asia takes.
Tell them where they can find you, Alexander, and tell me where you have been writing and where I can keep up with you and all of your updates on this stuff.
Definitely. So you can find me on Twitter at ACL Haynes. That's ACL, like the ligament in your knee, that I no longer have. Is an old nickname. That's the origin behind that. And then Haynes, Haynes. And then my website is alexandersmhaynes.com. I've been writing there. That's where a lot of my Cambridge Analytica stuff is going to be. And I occasionally publish for a few other places. I've gone into the Hong Kong Free Press and another magazine in Hong Kong, but I'll post about that on Twitter, and so that's at ACL Haynes.
Alexander, we're going to keep up with you, and we're going to get back to you when we get more information on Hong Kong, the coronavirus, and of course Cambridge Analytica. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Hey, thank you very much. It's been a great joy.
How great is Alexander? Like, honestly, how great is he? I started this podcast knowing very little about what was still happening in Hong Kong, and we're going to bring him on more because when we talk about guys who are going to give you unbiased, just straight facts, information about the news and what's happening around the world, he is our guy. So expect more from Alexander as time continues. It's incredible. Love this guy. So we're going to have more and more NFL content coming out. Super Bowl coming up this Sunday, so you're going to want to check out all those podcasts. We have Greg Bishop, one of my favorite Sports Illustrated writers. We put a podcast out with him earlier this week talking about the Super Bowl and what he anticipates and what he expects from the big game this Sunday. And this Kobe farewell, this remembrance, we're going to have a couple more people on, I'm hoping, to talk about Kobe. And then Friday we have a real big special one for you guys. So, thank you so much for listening. Please continue to send it everywhere. Alex listens on Google Play. I listen on Spotify. My parents listen on Apple Podcast. A couple other people listen on Speaker. And then, of course, all of our grandparents watch it on YouTube. So, there's no excuse for you not to be sending it to everybody that you know. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the love. And just remember to remind the people around you how much they mean to you while you still have a chance. Peace out, guys. Love you. I will talk to you again tomorrow.